Hey, it's Danny from projectmanaverse.com, and in this video I'm going to share 3 pro tips when designing your software controls. So first of all, what do I mean by a software control? Well, a control is basically something that you put in place to ensure something doesn't happen and something doesn't go wrong. That's what a control really is. And you can have controls on your actual system itself, the thing that you're building. And in the project world, for your project governance, you can have controls as well to make sure things aren't done that shouldn't be done, that you don't go in directions you shouldn't go in, and decisions aren't made that should not be made. So there's various kind of controls, but I'm focusing on the actual system controls, the controls you put in place in the system to make sure that things don't go wrong and everything works as it should do. And you can get various types of controls. Some of the common ones are, number one, detective controls. It's a control just to flag when something isn't right, when something's not working correctly. That's what we call a detective control. It detects it. The next one is a preventative control. So the control actually stops something from going wrong. It stops something from happening which should not be happening. And then sometimes you can get actually corrective controls, which not only do they detect the thing that shouldn't be happening, but they automatically put it right as well, which is very good. So those are the kind of controls that you can have in software. Now, why is this important? Why is it important to, when you're in your design phase, to make sure you're really thinking about the controls correctly and thoroughly? Well, it's important because if you don't put them in place, you can have a lot of trouble in the live world when you go live, or even in testing. Well, probably in testing first of all. So you don't want that. So you can have a lot of issues with data and things not working correctly, and problems and things not just looking quite right, and you can't figure out why. So it's really important to get those controls in place to stop them happening in the first place. And they are easily missed, and there's almost like no limit to how many controls you could have in your software. You don't want too many, you've got to get a good balance, but there's general rules that you can follow. So that's the first reason. The second reason it's important is if you don't put controls in place, sometimes it can cause issues in the software or the system or the data that you don't even realize, you don't even know are happening. So you could be, for example, getting some data out of the system at the back end of it, and it's used for some kind of reporting, and that data is wrong, but you just don't know. But if you had the controls in place, it would have been flagged that something wasn't quite right. But if you don't have the controls in place, you could be creating data, important information for customers potentially, and it's just not correct, and you have no idea that it's not correct. So you need to make sure these controls are in place. So let's go on to my pro tips. I'm going to share 3 things to think about, or 3 kind of controls to really think about when you are designing your software controls. Now, the first one is what we call reconciliations, and that is to make sure that the data in your system is matching up. So usually when you build some kind of software or an IT system, there's data in it, and it gets in one side and it comes out the other side, and it passes through various stages, it goes through various calculations or functionalities. Sometimes the data will change, sometimes it won't, but the data will often pass through bits of the system. And sometimes if you have a complex project and you have several systems in place, you have upstream systems, downstream systems, and the data is being passed between those systems, then yeah, often that data will move along, and you don't want it to necessarily change. You want to make sure that it's matching and it hasn't somehow gone wrong and altered along the way, because that's the worst thing, because it can happen. You've got data going through this very complex landscape, and it's going through so many functionalities and fields and tables that sometimes it can get corrupted or just go wrong, and that's what you don't want. So what you want to do is make sure that the reconciliation is in place to make sure the data hasn't changed, especially when you're moving data between one system and another. Now, you could be then moving that system through some kind of file transfer or a database to database connection, but you want to make sure that at point A, if it leaves point A and goes to point B, that it hasn't changed along the way, and that's what we call a reconciliation. So just make sure you have controls in place for that, and just think carefully about how you do it as well, because I've been tripped up before where we've done a reconciliation between system A and system B, and what we've done is we've taken the output file from system A, so it spits out a file. We take that file and then we take an output file and we put it into system B, and then system B spits out an output file. So we've got two extracts, one from system A, one from system B for the same data, and then we just make sure the numbers tie up and they're the same. Now that's a good control, but it's not truly telling you that what's in system A is the same as system B, because when that data is being extracted from system A, maybe it could change at that point. How do you know it hasn't changed in the export process? Same for system B as well. So you just need to be careful about the thoroughness of your controls. Instead of just doing an export, is there a way that you can somehow look directly in system A and do the reconciliation to system B without having to do a manual eyeball check? Because that's no good. You've got to make it automated, otherwise it's too cumbersome and it takes too long. But anyway, I won't speak any more about those controls. So reconciliations, think about your reconciliations, number one. Number two is think about something called UAM, which is user access management. This is a really big one. It's quite high profile these days. And user access management is all about people using the system, who is ultimately going to be able to use the system, who can log onto it, and what kind of data can they see in it and what kind of things can they do in it, because you'll have different kinds of privileges in your software. You won't just have one where everyone can do anything. You'll have restricted privileges where some people can just, the obvious one we all know is like read and write access. Some people can just read data in there. Some people can edit the spreadsheet. Some people can, save it down. That's a dumbed down, simple version. But you'll have various privileges and various accesses. So you want to make sure that you are thinking about the right privileges for the right person. And not only that, if you have a complex landscape of systems and you have several people in the business who have access to several systems, you want to make sure you're thinking about, if this person A has access to this system, should they also have access to this system? Or does that give them an advantage where they can do something a bit crafty and look at move money around or do something a bit dodgy and maybe a bit naughty or illegal? And we call those toxic combinations, where you've got access to one system and another system, and you shouldn't have access to both of them, because if you have access to both, then it's not really a safe control for the business, and we call that a toxic combination. And don't underestimate how complicated and difficult it is to get your user access management correct, and how much work it takes, especially with a big program like a big transformation. It's very, very complicated. It's a big headache. You've also got to think about how you raise the access and how it's all done. So yeah, think about that early. Think about your user access management controls. Now, the last kind of control to think about is something called preventative controls. And that basically means, going back to the data example, when you're moving data around from one system to another one, usually it's very common for a data to be moved in files, and you transfer the files or transfer a bunch of files in one batch, and then that file will go to another system. That system will ingest that file. Now, you don't want that file to contain garbage, and if it does, you don't want it to be able to process in that system, because if it gets too far downstream, you have to unpick everything, which takes a lot of work, and you have to go back, and it holds up your business processes. So ideally, if the data isn't correct in there, you want it to stop flowing, to stop going any further down before it causes too much damage. And that's where you want to have some kind of preventative control. So if you know, for example, in this file, you've got various columns of data. If you know, for example, that the numbers in there shouldn't exceed, like 10 digits, because it would be bonkers if it did, or it shouldn't have too many decimal places, or it shouldn't have alpha characters when they should all be numeric, things like that, you can program that into the receiving system to say, look, if you get this file, it should only have this kind of criteria on the numbers and on the fields and on the format of the file. That's another example. If the format of the file should be a certain way, you should only accept it in a certain way. Don't accept anything, because otherwise you could just send garbage down and it would take it in and cause all kind of problems. So you can program the receiving system to just make sure it's only taking certain types of formats or data or whatever you want to program, and that will stop it being ingested if it's not right. And then you can maybe have an alert on there, and you can have someone in the business looking at what's going on with the file. Why is it incorrupted? And you can go to the upstream system and find out what's happened there. Okay, I'm going to wrap up there. So very quickly, I'll do a recap and then we'll call it a day. So system controls are very important for software projects, because if you don't put them in there, you can have data issues when you go live, things going wrong, but also you could have things going wrong that you aren't even aware of. The data could be incorrect and it's causing problems to downstream reporting or financials or information to customers. So we need to get it right. Your Three controls I've talked about that you want to think about in your design phase are: number one, the reconciliation controls, making sure the data hasn't changed from point A to point B to point C. The next one is the UAM, the user access management, making sure that people have the right access to the right things and they don't have too much privilege when they log into the system. And that last one is those preventative controls to make sure that the receiving system of the data can only take certain types of data and format. Okay, that's it. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, and until tomorrow, please take care.